We want to welcome you to our NCAA Meet Referee training for 2022. We've got our two presenters from NAWGJ, Lois Coburn, whom you all know as she's our National Collegiate Assigner, and myself, your NASH president. In addition, we have from the Women's Gymnastics Coaches Association, the co-chairs of they have a jazz committee, just like we have a jazz committee. So that's Jackie Fain. She's the head coach and the senior woman administrator for Centenary College, and Jessica Santos, who just got promoted to co-head coach at Arizona State University. I'm going to give you a brief overview of the training. I just want to highlight in advance that we are not going to cover the basics. Most of that is in the manual, but we do have people who are new for the first time doing meet refereeing. They've not done a collegiate meet referee, so we are going to cover a few basics, but mostly we're going to emphasize what's new. All right, so we are going to talk about the goals and the rationale for the expanded meet referee role, and this is going to apply to both walking and non-walking meet refs. This is going to be a pilot year, so we're going to see how it goes, and then we're going to make some changes as we go along next year. We're also going to review the eligibility criteria. They're a little bit different than what we sent out to you in the email. We're going to talk about how you get assigned as a meet referee. And then we're going to do a brief review of the ongoing meet ref duties, which for many of you, you already know this in your experience, but we'll just do a brief review of that. We've embedded some questions in the training to highlight the changes or the areas that are in need of emphasis. This is in lieu of a written meet referee test. It may be that in the future we'll do an online meet referee test, but right now we thought we would just embed questions in here to draw your attention to the areas that are changed. And then at the end of the season, we're going to assess how the process went and we'll make modifications. And I'm going to turn it over at this point in time to Jackie and Jess and ask you if you would talk a little bit about the enhanced role of the meet referee, and in addition, the rationale for the Coaches Association wanting us to have an enhanced role.
Hi, everyone. This is Jackie. I'm not sure if Jess is on at the moment or not. I can't see her, so.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, hi, Jess. We're just going to talk a little bit about the enhanced role of the meet referee. Obviously, on the screen, it says all of the same duties as before, plus there'll be some additional duties now. The rationale that we had as a coaches organization for doing this, we felt there's a need for meet refs to have a little more control over how a meet runs to keep the meet running smoothly. The other reasons would be to help alleviate some mistakes that might happen during the course of a meet, which might lead to the delay of the meet if a judge is unsure how to work their scoring system. I know last year there was an instance where a judge made a mistake 3 times in a row, and there were several conferences, and it was the same mistake. She was just overlooking something. A meet referee could step in that instance and say, here's what's going on, here's what you're doing wrong, let's fix this. So that could help the meet run a little quicker and more smoothly on that event. To help panels come together for the best outcomes, to keep scores consistent throughout the meet, make sure that, we all know you guys judge a bazillion levels and you have more rules in your head than anyone can keep track of. And so, you might walk in and just totally forget that a layout on beam is a D. Just having a meet referee being able to walk over and remind you of that. If there's a conference and she's involved in the conference, she can just say, oh, don't forget it's a D in college, and take care of that problem right away. Help to guide the judges to quick and correct decisions. So if, someone forgot what a value is, again, like I just said, easy correction. And then to have a third eye on a routine that might be in question. If an unusual circumstance happens, a weird fall or something like that, then we have another person in the mix who can step in and help make quick decisions.
I think I'll expand on one more thing. I think one of the biggest things we heard is I think some of the meet refs out there kind of already do this in a good way, where they can kind of have that confidence to step in and say, hey, this is what's going on, but wasn't really defined in our rules, like that you could do that, should do that, shouldn't do that. So we're just trying to make everything a little more transparent.
Jess, do you want to do the next screen?
Sure. Expand communication and consistency, increase meet ref communication with coaches. I know that's been a big thing since we're not supposed to talk to any of the judges, really ever, but having that communication. So I think, for example, last year, someone was missing a front or side skill, and now maybe that meet ref who's not actually judging can help give some of that feedback that they maybe didn't inquire because the coach didn't know they were missing that. And it's not something that comes off the start value. Increase the meet ref communication with the judging panel. So, like Jackie said, at the end of the day, it's to the gymnast's benefit if something needs to be fixed or corrected. And to promote consistency of the meet ref duties at all meets. And I just kind of talked about that, where I think that's the biggest thing is some meet refs are really good and get in there and really help, conferences and help things get moving. And I think some just don't know that they could or can, or it wasn't really defined whether they should. So we're just trying to clean it all up.
And I think that was one of the things Lois and I were surprised about, is that it seemed that coaches had an idea that we were able as a meet referee to do some things that we thought that we can't do. And they wanted us to have a more proactive role as a meet referee. And so that's what this training is going to be about, is just highlight some of the areas in which there's going to be, it'll be clear at least that you can have a more active role. And Lois, are there any rule changes? Where are those manuals?
Okay, Crystal sent me yesterday updates to modifications and rules news to look at. So she's hoping to get one or both out on October 1st or October 15th. It's coming. Okay, Jackie, could you go over the fall timing procedures?
Yes, so we do not have clarification on this yet, but I can tell you it seems as though from social media and other sources that it passed, but we don't have clarification yet. But what we put through, and I don't know what the details will be until we get that clarification, but we put through that fall times will increase to 2 minutes so that athletic trainers have time to assess the athlete if there's an injury, if they need to stop, or if they're okay and they can continue. As I said, we don't have any details on the specifications of how that's going to work yet. Hopefully that will come out soon, but know that something like that is most likely coming. It was put through as a new thing this year because we had several instances this year where there were concerns about whether or not an athlete should continue, and that 45 seconds just wasn't enough time for medical personnel to assess them and see if they were okay, if they had concussion symptoms and other things like that.
So when that comes out, it'll be published in the NCAA rules modification. We anticipate that we may have to put out some more detailed procedures so that we'll actually know how to implement it, but that will be posted as well. So just keep your eyes out for that. Okay, so what's new? Lois, tell us what the eligibility requirements are to be a meet referee, please.
The requirements that were determined would be that this would be for national or brevet judges who had judged college for at least 2 4-year cycles. Question came up about whether someone who had dropped out for a while, so as long as the judge has done 8 years of collegiate judging. And then we had a question about people who've been coaches, and the coaches jazz committee approved that as counting towards the 8 years. And then you have to complete the online training prior to your first meet. Then you're going to need to check it off in jazz that you've completed your training. Tonight will count, or if you're talking to somebody else, once they do their video training, then they would check it off. Okay. The other request from the Coaches Association is that meet referees be assigned first. I've been working with the regional assigners and the coaches committee members to try to work out how we're going to do this. As of the moment, on Friday this week, the assigners will start with the local, which means that school does not fly people, walking meet refs. So that will be the first assigning day. The next assigning day next week will be the walking meet refs who are not necessarily local, but could be. And then a third day will be the non-walking, which means you're actually judging meet referees. And those are going to be kind of like what it was in the past. In the past, we did all the assigning, we got to the meet refs, and then someone was designated as the meet referee. We realized the criteria in some parts of the country are going to be difficult to fulfill. So we may have to make some changes in this, but this is the plan. And then for the month of October, we start with 2 days. One is 25% local, the second day is 25% local, and then it moves around through the whole month. So you might get an assignment in March, and then a few days later get one in January. It does not go chronologically, and that's so that every assigner is not assigning the same group of people on the same day.
And just to emphasize what Lois said, this is pretty much a reversal of what has been done in the past. The coaches did tell us they want the meet referee to be one of the most experienced judges on the floor. And in the past, that necessarily hasn't been the case. This new process is going to have us assigning those meet referees first so that those experienced judges can be in that role. All right, so now we have our first question. So which checklists are included in the NCAA Rule Modifications Manual to assist meet referees with their duties? And your choices are the pre-meeting checklist, the during the meet checklist, the post-meet checklist, or all of the above. The answer is all of them are in the meet referee section of the manual. I think we're all used to having, if you've been a meet referee, you know we have to do the pre-meeting checklist and turn that into the meet director. What kind of got slipped in there a couple of years ago, and I think we may, unless you were a meet referee, you probably didn't pay attention to it, was there's a during the meet checklist as well as a post-meet checklist. The ones I have here are not updated yet, so those will be in the rules modification manuals when you see them. But the pre-meet checklist looks like this, so most of you are familiar with that. There's also this during the meet checklist, and there's 2 columns, one for the non-officiating meet referee and one for the officiating meet referee. And we'll sometimes call those the walking meet ref or the judging meet ref. And they're pretty much identical with the exception, of course, that the judging meet ref can't do as many things as the non-judging meet ref can. At the bottom of that, there's a post-meet checklist. Once again, just pay attention to that and make sure that you check off all the things that you are expected to do. Now, we haven't seen those checklists yet because of the meet referee training. There's some enhanced roles that may not show up in the manual, so we will put together a supplemental document just so you'll have it all together, and that would be posted on our website as well. All right, question 2. Is it true or false? Meet referees should introduce themselves to the head coach of all competing teams prior to the pre-meet judging meeting. That's true. The meet ref needs to arrive earlier than the pre-meet meeting time so that you can perform some of these meet referee duties. You should introduce yourself to the head coaches for each team. And the reason for that is so that they can know where you will be sitting or standing, so that they will know what you look like. We did have in the evaluations of meet referees this past year, a couple of coaches who said, I didn't even know who the meet referee was. And that's probably in the cases when you're a judging meet ref rather than a walking meet ref. Even if you're a judging meet ref, just be sure and let the coaches know, I'm the meet ref. And if you need to come to me with an inquiry or a question, I'll be over at whatever event, most likely at SPARS. You can ask the coaches at this, when you introduce yourself, if they have any unusual or frequently missed elements, and they will often have those, or they will have those sheets that of elements that have been approved and given a particular value from USAG. And this was an interesting observation that Lois and I learned this year. And that was one of the coaches that we were working with told us that she said, I really don't know what they're spending so much time over there talking about. And I thought that maybe I'm not doing the right thing. And so try to spend about the same amount of time with each team if that's possible. So if you're going to spend about 3 minutes with the head coach of one team, try to spend about 3 minutes or so with the other team as well. Just so the coaches aren't wondering what the heck you're doing talking to the head coach of one team longer. You should also introduce yourself to the meet host if that's and scorer and announcers if they have separate people for those. Clarify who's going to go first, and this is only applicable in some institutions, but sometimes they want the announcer to go first, and they'll say competing next on vault is Mary Jane, and sometimes the announcer will wait until the chief judge raises the green flag. So ask the announcer and the meet host what their procedure is going to be. Did the announcer go first, or does the green flag go first? Clarify the meet format. Almost all of our meets are alternating meets, but there are a couple out there in which the events go on continuously. Instead of having vault and bars go alternating, It might be vault, bars, beam, and floor, and they just continue to go all the way around. So just make sure that you have that information so you can tell your judges. Many of our meets are televised now or they're streamed. So if there are television holds or specific procedures that television crew have asked for, find out what those are so you can relay those to your chief judges. This is a new one this year, and it's not new because of the enhanced role. It's just that we actually didn't understand that this was something that we should do, and that's ask for the number of exhibitions per team per event. So they're allowed, Jackie, what, 2 per event per team?
It's up to the host institution how many exhibitions can compete. And typically they'll tell the visiting team ahead of time before they ever come. You know, they're going to allow 2 on each event, or sometimes they'll say we're going to allow 2 on bars and vault, but only 1 on beam and floor. So it will depend on the host institution.
And that's just so you can tell your judges. Now, at some institutions, they prepare your slips for you. They're all in order, and they have the exhibition 1, exhibition 2 already there in your slips. But other times we walk out on the floor and we don't know it, and then we look up and there's another gymnast yet to come. So it'd be helpful for the judges to know that during the pre-meet meeting. Ask about scoring devices and arrange practice if it's a device that the judges haven't used before. We had one school last year that used a new, unusual device, and there were all kinds of problems with it, and it held the meet up, and the people weren't happy. So if that's the case, if the judges are going to be inputting their own scores, and if any single one judge doesn't understand, just arrange for them to get a practice time to go ahead and practice how to use that device. And then ask how you are going to be informed as the meet referee when the coaches have signed their score sheets. Because as you know, we all have to stay now until the score sheets are signed. I mean, some places it was really organized and easy to know, and other times we were running out the door trying to find the coach to sign the score sheet. So ask the meet host how they're going to handle that so that you can be informed yourself, but also inform your judges in the meeting. All right, question 3. When should the meet referee begin the pre-meet meeting with judges? 30 minutes prior to march in, 45 minutes prior to march in, as soon as all judges are dressed and ready to start, both A and C. Okay, so this is a change this year, and the meeting is going to begin 45 minutes prior to competition. And that was done because we found that we were going to need more time prior to going out on the floor, given the new meet referee role. And in addition to that, even though we had 30 minutes, it generally was only about 20 minutes because we get to go out into the floor as soon as warm-ups are done. And so that really only gave us about 20 minutes to do that. Your report time may be different than that. And as you know, many schools have a 1 hour or more report time because of parking and other logistical issues. But regardless, as a meet referee, you need to get there early enough so you can fulfill all your pre-meet duties. Now, at the officials meeting, the pre-meet meeting, we're going to highly recommend to you that each panel would view and discuss 2 collegiate routines. And the reason for that is there's a real desire on the part of all of us, coaches and judges, to minimize errors, particularly at the first meets. What we noticed in the evaluations is when coaches say that a judge made a mistake, we get more of those at the beginning of the season than toward the end of the season when you've had more time to put those new rules into place. So this is just a chance to refresh your brain and to promote consistency from the first gymnast to the last. Now, that's to help both judges prepare. You, an experienced person, may not need to review those routines, but it may help the other judge. So you can help that other judge and make sure you're both got all those rules in place to minimize the possibility of a mistake on those first routines out. When you're practice judging these, the emphasis is not on the score. So Lois and Judy will be posting the routines online sometime soon. They have scores on them. That's not the emphasis here. The emphasis here is just on making sure you get all the collegiate modifications refreshed in your brain, and also the composition requirements that are different, the up to the level deductions. So you just might go through, notate the routine, and then talk about each of those areas. And you should have time to do 1 or 2 of those. Now, this is not like base score that we do when we do state meets and regional meets. It's not going to be conducted by the meet referee, in which every single judge does that. Each of your panels will get together and do a little bit of this review. And vault doesn't, there's not much to do on vault. So if the people who are doing vault in another event won't have to spend as much time as those who are doing 2 other events. Now, to make this easier for you, Judy Dobransky and I have been working on routines, and we're very close to being done. We'll have a pool of routines available on the NAJ website. And what we did was agreed with the coaches that we would not use routines from the institutions in the competition. So what you'll see that's going to be unusual is every routine is going to have the name of the institution. So vault number 1 may have Arizona State, and vault number 2 may have Centenary. And that's so the judges can make sure they don't pick those schools to do their practice review. And we'll also post a list of those so that they'll be able to just go straight to vault number 8 to make sure, or 9 or whatever number, to make sure that they can get to the routine that they, from an institution that's not in the competition. Athletes who are in this pool are no longer competing. Judy and I have checked pretty much every athlete. We're concerned about a couple that we need to check on because some of them can do 5th year now. So once we get those all cleared up, we will be posting those. We're also going to put them up on a Google Drive so that those of you who meet refs, if you would want, or chief judges or whomever, can download them in advance as a backup, because we do know that sometimes we get to meet, and where we are underneath the ground may not have very great Wi-Fi capabilities. So we can have them there that you can download and have as a backup. The instructions will be on the website. It'll be, if you've used Google Drive, it's real easy. You just go to that routine. We'll send you the links and you will click on it and download it. And you can view them on your phone, your iPad, or any other device. And every single judge doesn't have to have one of those. So if you, for whatever reason, don't have a device that you think will work, you could contact the other judge on your panel and ask if they're going to have a phone or an iPad or something with them they could use. The phone is, we think, is okay because it's, it's a little harder to see. It's obviously smaller, but it's not that you have to get down the deductions so much. It's more the emphasis on reviewing the college rules and the college composition and the up to the level and that kind of thing. Okay, so now for the pre-meet checklist, you're going to review all the items on the checklist. We're not going to go over those. In addition, though, you should let the judges know the number of exhibition gymnasts. We've already talked about that. Let them know what the scoring input device is and have them practice with that device if it's an unusual one. Many schools have somebody who's putting those scores in, but many don't. So you want to make sure that they don't get flustered when it's not working properly. And then review the rules for substitution and the procedures, and we're going to go over those in just a moment. Question 4, which of the following statements is correct? Jackie, I think you're going to do this.
All right. A is teams may make a substitution in the lineup after an event begins by notifying the chief judge at that event. B is the substitute must replace the teammate in the same lineup position. C, after a gymnast signals the chief judge to begin her routine, she may not be substituted with another gymnast regardless of what occurs following the signal. And D is all of the above.
And the answer is?
All answers are correct. D. So everyone got it right. Not listed in the same location in rules modifications. So note the page numbers. So all of these are in the rules modification, but they're not all in the same place. Substitutions may be made after an event begins. So once the flag is raised for the team's first competitor on that event, the substitution can be made by notifying the chief judge at the event, and the substitute must replace the teammate in the same lineup position. So my first kid goes and I come over and I say, Judge, I need to substitute my 5th athlete and put in Mary Jane instead of Susie Q. So that would be your responsibility to make sure that that gets notated and sent to the head table at that time. After gymnast signals the chief judge to begin her routine, she may not be substituted with another gymnast regardless of what occurs following the signal. So once she salutes you, she's a go or a scratch, depending on what happens. There may be a kid who thinks maybe they had an injury on the event before, but they think they're okay. And, maybe once they step up on the floor or something, or raise their arm up over their head for bars, they realize that they're not going to be able to go. So that could be an instance. And, our athletes think that they're invincible, so they might try to do that.
Okay. And this can kind of be nerve-wracking for everybody. And if you could talk to us about how the coach might be feeling.
Yeah, so it is a little bit stressful, I will say, when there's a quick substitution that has to happen, because who's ever making the decision, if it's the head coach, the coach that coaches that event, first of all, they have to make that decision. Okay, I'm going to have to pull this kid. And then they have to think about who am I going to put in? And then they have to think about who do I need to tell? And then they have to tell the kids, and then they have to tell the judge, and then somebody needs to tell the score table. And so there's a lot going on. And so, yeah, coaches definitely feel a little bit tense and stressed in that moment of decision. You know, if you can, as a meet referee, come over and say, what can I do to help? If you notice that a situation like that is happening, that definitely helps the coach and the coaching staff make sure that everything is getting taken care of. Another person to just kind of calm them down. Also, remind the judges in your pre-meet meeting to notate the change on their score sheets and their judging papers in case of inquiry or confusion, because that has been an issue sometimes in the past where a judge forgot to, you know, change the gymnast's name on their paper, and then there was an inquiry and it was, you know, whoa, I don't have her on my paper. Where did she compete? So just remembering to change their score sheets and their papers.
Yeah, that's good.
Jackie, we just had a chat question. If the gymnast hasn't warmed up, the question is, does she get a touch?
No,
No.
that
That's
would
what
be if the event has already started, they would not. That would be a coach's decision to pull someone out and put in someone who didn't touch.
Okay, Lois, some of the points of emphasis on the pre-meet checklist.
Some of the things that we've included in this presentation came about because of things we saw in the evaluations. So just remember the importance of impartiality and ignoring any reputation of the gymnast. Sometimes high scores aren't always appreciated by the coach. The coach knows when their gymnast is getting overscored. They're probably happy it happened, but it doesn't help them deal with the two gymnasts that were involved. And they want accurate scoring that reflects the performance. So you're judging the performance that day, not prior routines, not something that happened a month earlier, and certainly not something that happened on television. And they remind us constantly to judge consistently across the divisions and the institutions. It's the biggest complaint we get, or one of the biggest ones. Coaches view that in certain parts of the country and in certain divisions, the judging is different. So the more we can do to be consistent from the beginning of the season to the end of the season with all divisions, because there may be a top gymnast on one of those Division 2 or 3 schools that certainly needs to be rewarded equally to the Division 1 gymnast.
As Lois was just saying, points of emphasis. Every score is important for the national qualifying score for team and individuals. Every meet that we compete in, the score that every individual gets on any event or that the team gets may count towards their NQS, which is what we use to qualify to regionals and to nationals. And that would be for all divisions, because gymnastics is a non-divisional sport. So Division 1, 2, or 3 can qualify to NCAA tournament. So it's really important for all the teams that you go in with an impartial viewpoint of, you know, whatever level that team is, you know, a Power 5 school, mid-level Division 1 school, Division 2, Division 3, there may be individuals, especially on some of those teams, who are worthy of qualifying on to postseason, you know, that should get scored fairly in that regard. There's also now a regular season All-American award that comes out from NQS scores. And so there's a number of them that are awarded for Division 1, some that are awarded for Division 2, and some that are awarded for Division 3. So the NQS also counts towards that regular season All-American status, which can be, you know, a very important award for some of our athletes who are looking to move on or do other things. And, you know, that award is obviously recognition for them and their schools.
Every time that athlete goes up, every half tenth is important. And we know that, and we know you know that. And you can remind your panel of that, that every single half tenth counts for one reason or another.
Yeah, and that, I mean, it can come down to that half tenth at one meet, you know, where maybe there's two kids tied with their NQS going into the conference meet. And if there's a discrepancy on one score on that athlete, that could keep them from All-American status or from qualifying on to the NCAA tournament round. So I mean, that can happen at any meet during the year on any routine for any athlete. So it's hugely important that we're just making sure that we're being as fair and consistent as we can be across the country and across all the divisions.
And I don't know if I've got the exact number right, but it's something like the top 16 per event make All-American status. Okay, so which of the following is not a reason to conference? When the counting scores are out of range, if there's an impossible start value, if the composition deduction was missed, if there's a question about the UTL that can have an impact on the average score, or if an inquiry is submitted. So there's no change here. The answer is C. You can conference for all of the other reasons, but you don't conference when the composition deduction was missed. And you may not even know that. Obviously, that's one that we don't have to flash, but you may sense that. But even if you sense that, that's not a reason to conference. And then we're going to review some logistics with conferencing. You can know when conferences can occur, but this is not a time to conduct a clinic. This isn't the time to make sure your other judge is learning how to judge collegiate gymnastics, or to make sure that that judge understands the rules. There's been a few meets that have even been televised, so you can see them on TV, where there's a tremendous number of conferences going on. And of course, you need to conference when it's appropriate to conference, but make those conferences as quick and as timely as you can, because you've got the next athlete sitting there waiting to go up and getting cold and getting nervous. Try not to hold up the meet, because you do know that the next athlete is waiting. And it does reduce the audience and television audience interest. And where some of you don't think that's too important, television is extremely important to helping our sport in collegiate gymnastics get gymnasts to stay in the sport and aim for a college scholarship. So we do need to pay attention to what the television audience is interested in. And then as a meet referee, you can participate in those conferences. And if one of the things the coaches would like you to do is make sure they move things along. So if you see that those conversations are going in the direction of a clinic instead of a conference, just help them move that along, help that chief judge. During the meet, you're going to review all those checklist items that are listed. We're not going to go over them, but some other things you can do while you're out on the floor. Monitor the open scoring protocol. Now, you can only do that if you're a walking meet ref, but occasionally there will be a comment made that the scores and the start values were not flashed at the same time. And we all know that that's supposed to happen, but as a meet referee, if you're a walking meet ref, you can notice that. Just go over and kindly say to the judge, don't forget that you need to flash them together. And that's a kindness for the judge, because that will keep that judge hopefully from getting a negative evaluation from a coach who was ready to put that in there.
Okay, I just was going to add too, as a meet ref, keep an eye on the way the scores are flashed by the flashers, because sometimes we'll hear from the audience later that they didn't keep the score up long enough, they didn't turn it around. And you can make that go faster and more efficiently on the first couple of rotations by looking to see what's happening, and if the coaches in the audience can see what's being flashed.
Good point. And then if you have summary forms from teams, be sure and collect those and check them for accuracy and make sure it's on the correct event. Somehow we had somebody filled out one for the wrong event last year. I don't know how that happened. We're still kind of puzzling over that one. But as a meet referee, just check and make sure that it's a beam. If it's beam, that's what they're actually giving you the form for, and make sure you get it to the beam judges. And then if you are a walking meet ref, you can notate as many routines as possible. We have a sample form for you up on the NAJ website if you're interested in using it. You don't have to score the routine. You won't have time. You'll just be going back and forth from vault to bars, back and forth. But you can notate anything that you notice as a deduction, and that might help you if a coach comes up to talk to you about what's been going on with the scoring. All right, our next question. When giving an inquiry to the judging panel, the meet referee should refrain from making comments about the routine. Is that true or false? That's what's different this year. The meet referee may make comments to facilitate the inquiry. In some parts of the country, you may have already been doing that. In other parts of the country, that wasn't happening. And so the intent here is simply to standardize and to make sure that the meet referee does have some input. The question is, prior to taking an inquiry form to the panel, the meet referee may look at a video of the routine being inquired if she or he did not see it performed. So this would most typically be true when it is a judging meet referee, probably always be true almost. but it could also happen if you're a walking meet referee. So is this true or false? And that's true. And we're calling that video replay. And we spent a lot of time last year talking about that. So if you were on our clinics last year, you're aware of this. Now, video replay, not to be confused with the video review that happens later, is allowed if a meet ref didn't see a routine. In contrast to video review, you must watch that routine in regular speed, and you can only watch it one time only, because the idea is that you would see it from the same perspective as the judging panel. Our suggestion is that you refrain from commenting to the coach after the video replay. So you might see that, oh yes, she definitely broke that series. Then you take the inquiry over to the panel, and they hadn't even noticed that. They noticed something else, and that's what the deduction was for something else. So you can just watch the video replay and then just take your inquiry over. Don't say anything to the coach at this point in time. If there is an inquiry, of course, you should consult with the coaches considering the inquiry and make sure that the form is filled out completely.
I find it helpful if I have time to go check the start values and the scores from the scoring table, so that when I go over with the inquiry, I already have that information and just need to double check with the panel. Let me insert one of my pet peeves. Keep your score sheets organized so you don't have to sit there in the inquiry flipping through it to figure out who they're talking about. Whatever system you use, it should be such that you can quickly find the correct gymnast. And then there's a misconception that they can't inquire if all the start values are a 10. They can still inquire on flat compositional requirements up to the level, neutral deductions, or unusual occurrences and falls. The inquiry form will be in the modifications.
And what's nice about the form is that you don't have to try to remember what's allowed to do the inquiry, because it's all listed right there.
The changes Cookie mentioned is that if you were the kind of meet referee who took the inquiry over and left it with the panel and then came back and got it, you can be more involved with this new procedure. You can counsel if you've either seen the routine or there's a question, and you can ask them a question. So you're not just handing the paper in and walking away, but the meet referee may not require a change in the score. Then you want to make sure that that score change is made at the scores table, and then return the inquiry form to the coach and explain what happened.
And the reason that we get to watch the video now, if we didn't see the routine, is so that meet referee can participate in an informed and meaningful way in the discussion with the panel. So take that opportunity to take a look at the video. The coaches should cue that up for you, and then you can actually have input into that panel discussion. For many of us, that will be a change. Some of you may have been doing that already. Okay, coach conversations. There is a code of ethics for coaches in the back of the manual, and it's just a reminder that conversations with a chief judge or a meet referee are allowable, and that's for the purposes of either the inquiry after it's been filed or the decision. So that would probably often happen with the chief judge in a meet when there's not a walking meet ref. Most often in the walking meet ref, you'll have the walking meet ref be the person who will be the intermediary between the coach and the judging panel. No coach or competitor shall participate in a judges conference or be within hearing distance of such conferences. So if you as a meet referee notice that, just go over and gently and kindly remind the coaches that they just need to step back a little bit so that they're not within earshot of the conference. Question 8. If a gymnast demonstrates unsportsmanlike behavior, she's given a warning. If a second infraction occurs, the deduction is, and you can see them there. Your choices are 1/10 from the individual score or team score, or 2/10 from the individual score or team score. And the answer is A. The warning is given first by a judge, then you notify the meet referee. The second time, 1/10 is taken from the gymnast score for that event, and the deduction is taken either by the meet ref or the chief judge, depending on the circumstances. I don't think I've ever heard of this. Anybody? Jackie, have you ever heard of a gymnast? No. So just to note that the difference there between our age group program and the deduction and the process. Which of the following is not correct if a coach demonstrates unsportsmanlike behavior? The first time a warning is issued and a yellow card is given. Oh, and Jackie, I think you should do this. This is a
Okay.
coach question.
That's great. Second time is a 1/10 deduction taken from the team score by the meet referee. C is a red card is issued if there is another violation. Or D, the coach in violation may remain on the competition floor for safety purposes only, spotting, equipment adjusting, etc.
And the answer is?
The answer is C. Collegiate Gymnastics does not use a red card. So all of the other choices were correct. So coaches are required to act in a sportsmanlike, positive, polite, respectful, and disciplined manner with complete integrity. It is their responsibility to see that their teams handle themselves in a sportsmanlike manner. I think coaches have gotten better at this over time, but we're all very passionate and competitive. And, sometimes things happen that may get a coach fired up about something. And so as a meet ref, I think it helps if you see something like that happening, if you see a coach starting to get agitated, if they're coming over and talking to you, maybe just helping to calm them down and remind them to be positive and to be professional. Sometimes it's hard, I understand. But then in those instances, you have to take control and use the system that you have in place to remind that coach that they need to pull it in.
Jackie, we've had a couple questions on
Yeah.
how to apply the unsportsmanlike conduct deduction for the gymnast.
For the gymnast.
If it's to the gymnast or to somebody else who's unsportsmanlike on the team.
Yeah, I would say it's not specified, but in my mind, it would be to any athlete on the floor. It doesn't have to be specifically the one that's competing right now. If there's a teammate standing out on the floor with the rest of the team, and maybe they're making comments behind the judge that are derogatory comments or something like that, I think that that's an appropriate time for a judge to notify their coach that they're portraying unsportsmanlike conduct and give them a notice or give them a warning. I don't think it has to be the gymnast that's competing. And typically it probably wouldn't be the gymnast that's competing unless, something happened during their routine.
In terms of the coach conduct violations, and this has to do with issuing a yellow card. And we got more interested in this last year because of a comment from the head of the ethics committee for the Coaches Association, who said, we can't do anything about possible violations if you don't issue a yellow card. And I wasn't really aware of that because we hear about problems where the judge didn't feel comfortable giving a yellow card. So I'm passing that on to everyone, that if it's a situation that requires a yellow card, then please give it. So
I'm just going to interrupt and clarify. So what you meant by doing anything is they will contact that institution and the coach, and they will actually look into the situation. And of course, there could be some disciplinary action that would occur, at least some warning to try to improve the behaviors.
Any judge can give the warning, and you show the yellow card, but you don't give it to the coach. Or then you would not have it for use if you needed it later.
And we also had one coach this year who took the yellow card and paraded it around like the coach was proud of it. So not such a good practice.
Right. So the meet referee is notified that the yellow card was given. Second time, there's a 1/10 deduction from the team score by the meet referee. And for additional violations, it's a 1/10 deduction each. Of several years ago, it was added to the collegiate rules that the coach may remain on the floor for safety purposes, spotting equipment, etc. That was when they took away the red card rule. So the procedure is the meet referee notifies the other panels just in case there are other warnings or if there have been warnings on prior events. Then it's important that the meet referee notes the yellow card on the score sheet at the end of the meet. And as Cookie just said, the coaches ethics committee reviews all yellow card violations. If you don't give the yellow card, then as I said earlier, it will not go to the ethics committee. The next section was put together from some information that came from, I think it was basketball or baseball, but it was another sport in terms of what's considered reasons for giving a yellow card. Addresses an official in a disrespectful manner, attempts to influence an official's decision by words, expressions, gestures, body language, or similar behaviors, objects to an official's decision by words, expressions, gestures, body language, or similar behaviors, uses a loud voice and hostile gestures when talking to the meet referee, submitting an inquiry, or submitting routine summaries. This is all new. We've never really had any definitions. So this is one reason we've pulled this together.
Lois, there was a question if there's a place on the score sheet to notate yellow cards.
I believe there is.
There is a box on the bottom. I believe.
Box, yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say later that you then have to write up a report about it. Incites undesirable crowd reactions, uses profanity or language that is abusive, vulgar, obscene, or using derogatory remarks about an official, athletes, or spectators, makes comments related to race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, gender, gender expression, gender identity, sexual orientation, or disability. And the last one, flaunts the issuance of a yellow card, which would then be considered a second occurrence. So then there's a deduction from the team score. Yes, I just got a question about what we will publish these. They are now between us and the coaches committee for finalization. You will get a copy of them.
So we came up with these because some judges who we were judging with last year basically said they really were having a hard time distinguishing what's kind of normal human frustration versus something that would be considered to be yellow card behavior. So we asked, and Heather came up with this list from another sport. We adapted it for gymnastics and the yellow card situation to give you some ideas. Okay, often we get questions when we're meet referees and we think like, am I supposed to know that? And so then we kind of get this deer in the headlights look. So we're going to go over just a couple of those. Question 10 is true or false. As in addition to the competition landing mats, which is 20 centimeters, up to 9 inches of supplemental landing mats are allowed. And is that true or false? And that is true. Now, the collegiate programs, for the most part, use the 20 centimeter mats. So if you look at the vault here, I'm not sure your screen is going to pick up my arrow, but that's the 20 centimeter mat. It's much thicker than the mats that we typically use in the age group program. And that often confuses judges because you don't see that very often unless you're at a college meet or an international elite meet on a podium. So you can have that competition landing mat, which is up to 9 inches, and then you can have an additional 9 inches of supplemental landing mats. So in this case, you've got another 4-inch mat and you've got a sting mat on top, and that sting mat can go on top or in the bottom. For the equipment and matting, we don't often get involved in this, but there's a couple of times when we do, and it's typically on vault. And the other area where we sometimes have a question mark is what you can put a board on for mounting beam and bars. So be sure and go into review this year's page 7 and 8 of the rules modifications. If you need to brush up on your mats, we've posted the Mystery of the Mats video that we did as a clinic this summer on the NAJ website. It's in the section called the NAJ YouTube channel. And just note that the colleges use this 20 centimeter landing mats, and then they can have an additional 9 inches on top of that. Question 11, true or false? A board may be placed on an 8-inch skill cushion for mounting bars in beam. And that is false. So the one thing that you really have to know is what you can't do is that. You can't put a board on top of the 8-inch. They can put them on just about anything else, but you can't put it on that 8-inch. The coaches are pretty savvy about this, so it's not usually a problem, but I would say that as we were talking about, the only 2 times that we think we've had issues dealing with matting had to do with vault and then with bars and beam, putting the board on top of the 8-incher. True or false? Plywood may be under the board, but it must have a non-skid surface on both sides. And for college, that is true. They can use plywood, but it must be a 1/2-inch plywood board with a non-skid surface on both sides. And that is generally provided at the meet, or if a team brings one, then they're supposed to make that available to any other team who is present.
Cookie, there was a question. If they have the board on an unauthorized surface, it's a 3/10 deduction with no warning. That was the question.
Okay, and that would be the answer, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so true or false? The round-off pad may only be used for your Yurchenko and front handspring onto the board entry vaults. We are emphasizing this because I think it's confusing language. The rule modifications state that the round-off pad may only be used for round-off vaults or front handspring vaults. The problem with it is I think when we see round-off pad, we automatically think the U mat, and it's the hand placement mat. And I think maybe next year, Jackie, if we can change that to say hand placement mat, it'll do away with that confusion, because there was an instance last year, maybe before, in which a judge told a coach that they could not use the U-shaped mat for other vaults other than the Yurchenko and front handspring. And I think the confusion was because the way that this reads, round off pad. But think of round off pad as being the hand placement mat, and then the U-shaped mat, of course, is required for, as you know, for Yurchenko and front handspring onto the board vaults. And it's for those vaults, it has to be snug around the board, and for the other types of vaults, they can have space between it. So small chalk marks may be placed on the side of the beam to designate a gymnast's starting position. True or false? Well, if you go to a meet, you would think it's true, but it's false. So except for a small mark on the top surface of the beam, chalk may not be applied directly to the beam. This is one that probably gets bias a little bit more than it should, so we might want to pay attention to it. The chalk marks should only be on the top surface of the beam, not directly on the side of the beam. If a gymnast's grip breaks on bars, she's got 45 seconds to remount the apparatus. True or false? That's false. So for college, the broken grip rule is that the gymnast may repeat as the last team competitor or after the last exhibition. If that doesn't give her enough time to prepare, then she can have up to 5 minutes. So to say she was the last gymnast, there are no exhibition gymnasts, she can have up to 5 minutes to prepare, which means somebody's got to be timing that, and you do take that deduction for the fall. Question 17, Jackie.
Which of the following statements is incorrect regarding gymnast attire? The uniform must be identical for all athletes on a team. Undergarments must be same color of Leo or skin tone. Undergarments do not have to match the leotard color. The deduction for a gymnast being out of uniform is 3/10 from the team score. The deduction for wearing jewelry other than studs is 2/10. Some but not all of these are correct, or all of these are correct.
The correct answer is G. So G
Yeah.
was, all of those were correct
All of
except
them.
F, which obviously could not be correct.
So the official uniform must be identical for all athletes on the team. So the leotard they're competing in must be identical for all athletes on the team. Undergarments must be the same color of the leotard or skin tone. Teams do not have to wear matching colored undergarments. We changed this a couple of years ago. We felt like we shouldn't be dictating what athletes should wear for undergarment. You know, there was some situation a few years ago with backless leotard, and there was one athlete from a team that had on a sports bra and no one else from the team had that on. And there were questions about whether or not that was a uniform violation because they didn't all match. So we decided that the undergarment decision should be up to the athletes. Backless is okay. So we do not have to have matching bras on the team to be considered in uniform. They are allowed to have a different bra on than other people on their team if they desire.
If the gymnast is out of uniform, the meet referee notifies the gymnast if they're out of uniform. If they don't comply, then there's a 3/10 team deduction. Stud piercings are allowable any number, any location, and that was clarified recently. Other jewelry, it's a 2/10 deduction after warning, taking from the gymnast score for each occurrence, which means as a meet referee, if you take it, then you need to notify the panels on the events that are coming up after that. And note that one's a 2/10 and one's a 3/10 deduction. So there's a difference.
And let me add that for the jewelry, it is studs only. It does not include bars or, well, I don't know what the things are called that they do in their ears, where they have a hole in their ear. The big thing. It is like literally only studs. There is no limit on how many studs they can have or where the studs are located.
Okay, which statement's incorrect regarding gymnast behavior during the 2-minute transition period? Gymnasts may stretch on the matting around the apparatus, invert, and prepare for a touch, but they may not mount the apparatus or perform skills on the apparatus. They may use the vault runway to prepare for the touch. They may jump, bounce, run, stretch on the floor, but may not perform gymnastics skills. A and B are correct. All are correct. So the answer is E. All are correct.
Can you go back to that one real quick? Because I feel like there are always questions surrounding this one. A says that they can stretch on the matting around the apparatus, invert, and prepare. But on the floor, it says they may not perform gymnastics skills. And that's meant to be humbling, basically. They can still invert. They can still do like a handstand or a fast cartwheel. But like, I think that we probably should reword this in the future. Performing gymnastics skills is meant to be like they can't do tumbling passes.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. So the transition rules are back in Appendix 8. And we often don't pay attention to this because it really is more something that the meet host is worrying about and doing, and the coaches know these rules. However, yeah, of course, we have had coaches come up and say, but they're not following the transition rules. And so then we have to act like we know them. So we're going to review them very quickly. So there is a 2-minute transition allowed after march-in ceremony, and that's followed then, of course, by the first 4-minute touch warm-up on whatever events. After each event, there's also a 2-minute transition that's followed by a 4-minute touch. The question that we had last year on this was a coach felt that the 2-minute transition and the 4-minute touch had been combined, and that they were not getting the 2-minute transition, and et cetera, things they thought that the announcer had called it too fast, et cetera. And they get upset by this because they practice all of these things and they know how much time their athletes need, as do the athletes. So if you just kind of stick this in your head, there's a 2-minute transition period and they have a 4-minute touch. The transition starts after the final competitor's initial score is flashed. Okay, so the final competitor's initial score is flashed, and that's including the exhibition, or when the team arrives at the corral if you have a podium meet. So just make sure the announcer waits for the appropriate time. If you're a meet referee, a walking meet referee, you might have time to actually attend to this. If you're a judging meet referee, you probably won't. But do take a look at Appendix 8.
Cookie, excuse me. I've had the complaint that the home team was not strict enough on the transition time, and they were lax about starting the next period. And the away coaches were concerned because their athletes were used to a certain amount of time.
And they're trying to prepare them for postseason, so they want them to get used to doing what they need to do in the order they need to do it. And the teams must transition immediately to the next event after the last score is flashed. They can't dilly-dally around there. And as we said, the allowable activity may be performed only at the next competitive event. And then we're going to move into post-meet duties, and we'll start with the video review, Lois.
Okay. There's one video review allowed per team per meet. The coach must submit the form and the cued video to the meet director within 5 minutes, determined by the final score being posted or the return of a final inquiry, whichever is the latter. If the meet referee is on the panel, the next highest rated judge must participate. So there are always 3 participants. The video reviews on the competition floor, and only the meet referee and panel judges may be present. We understand that there was some concern in the past that there was discussion in the judges' room involved in the video review. So they want it only to be the 3 judges who should be directly involved. And remember that this is not a criticism of the panel. The video review is helpful to get the score right. It's okay to correct a mistake. The one that seems to come up is whether it was a triple full or a double full, so fix it if you made a mistake. And as I said, it's always 3 people and a simple majority determines the outcome. And the meet referee notes the results of the video review on the form to the meet director, who returns it to the coach. And if there's an adjusted score, the judges have to fix it on the score sheet and initial it. And if it's unsuccessful, a 1/10 deduction occurs, or if they ask for review of execution, which is not allowed, it's a 1/10 deduction.
And you can help them with that. If you see that that's what they've done, just make sure they cross that out. We don't want to be taking deductions unnecessarily. We want to make sure that our score is as correct as it can be. And there's the video review form. So it's nice. Again, it's laid out so that they can only fill in what the information for the areas that are allowable.
There are a couple questions. One was addressing the video that we would use for a video review. If it has to be institutional, if it can be from a parent in the audience, or a videographer if one is on site. The rules for the video review state that it has to be an institutional video. And I believe we have now put in there that it can be from TV.
TV, yes.
On site, yes.
All right, so some of our biggest changes are going to come here in the post-meet meeting with judges. While waiting for the score sheets, you as a meet rep can ask the judges if there's any areas that are questionable that you would like to have communicated to the coaches. This may have happened to you once in a while. You've judged a routine, you're counting up something, and you're not really sure. So you're kind of giving the athlete the benefit of the doubt, but you walk off the floor and you say to your fellow judge, do you know all the A's that she needed? And the other judge may say, well, I don't know, let me look. And they start counting and they realize, oh my gosh, we missed an A. So there may be missing something. It might be a front backside choreography or whatever. You as a meet referee can ask the judges that, and then we can get that information to them so that that mistake doesn't get repeated. And sometimes we just know that the athlete made a mistake, but other times it could be that the coach changed the routine or the athlete changed the routine and they didn't realize that they were missing their choreography on beam or missing an A. Or last year we had an athlete missing a B on floor all year long. We want to get that information, and I think this is the spirit of the new meet referee role, is to try to get this information to coaches so it's not a gotcha. We kind of, I think they feel like we're trying to get them. Like, oh, you didn't have a UTL, I gotcha. Well, no, if they don't have a UTL, we want to tell them that they don't have a UTL. So you can do that as a meet referee. Be sure and remind the judges they need to stay until the coaches have signed the official score sheets. And so to keep that from being too long, because you're going to be out on the floor as a meet referee, because you have to stay a little longer, then you can text one of the judges after the coaches sign, and then you can tell the judges that they can go ahead and go on home. This is an important one. If you read the rule book, it says that the scores must be checked before the routine summaries are distributed. That's not what tends to happen. What tends to happen is we get the routine summaries, we're waiting for the score sheets to come in, and we start handing out the routine summaries. You really do need to wait until the scores, that's the way it reads, the scores have to be checked first before the routine summaries are distributed. And what we've noticed is that in a few cases, what has happened is people get involved in doing their routine summaries and then they don't spend a detailed amount of time, or every single judge doesn't actually check the scores. So we want all judges to check their scores for their events. Be sure and double check scores for routines that were inquired. We did have an instance this year in which the score sheet had to be sent back out to the judges to be signed again after the meet because there was a mistake, because one of the inquiries didn't get recorded, and then when they checked the scores they didn't catch it. So be sure and double check those scores, and meet ref can do that as well. Judges can begin score verification while the video review occurs. So the video review is only going to involve some of the judges. The other judges can go ahead and start verifying the scores on the score sheet. The meet referee, you need to, of course, record all warnings and yellow cards on the score sheet. And then you need to get a final signature after the video review score change is made. So make sure that happens and make sure you get a final signature. And then you must be available to the head coaches for 5 minutes following the signing of the official score sheet. So that's why we said text back to the room to some judge or call them so that the judges know they can leave, because you have to stay for an additional 5 minutes. And that's not new. That has been there for a while. And then be sure and give the meet ref checklist to the meet director. Most people give it to them at the beginning of the meet, but you can give it to them at the end if you haven't already done that. The routine summary forms, probably the biggest area of criticism that the coaches have given us has been that not completing the routine summary forms in a proper way. So you give them the routine summary forms to the judges after they've done the score verification. Be sure and remember that. And they can have up to 6 of those, and it's okay to submit an exhibition gymnast as part of their 6. The head coach can provide the skill information on the summary form, or they can provide 2 copies of the inquiry form. And the reason for the 2 copies is so that each judge will have a copy of that form and have the elements that they think that the athlete performed. And then the routine summary forms, you oversee that process. Please make sure it's independent completion. We're not supposed to talk to one another. Check the forms before you return to make sure they're legible and they're not using shorthand. Ask the judges to correct it if they did use shorthand, or if the deductions don't add up to the score deductions.
We had made some suggestions to the score verification, the routine summary form, and they were incorporated. So make sure you look at all the spaces there are some questions up above that I think people tend to not complete. So if it's not completed by the coach, then please make sure you complete.
Okay, now this is a big change. When you're returning the summary forms, you as a meet referee can comment to the coach about what you saw. But you have to state that this is your observation or question, not that of the judging panel. So what does that mean? That means that they've completed the summary forms, and sometimes judges aren't prepared to do this for a lot of reasons. I'm sure you all know them. Or they just didn't have time to write all those notes for what that half-tenth was taken for. Well, you may have had a chance to see what it was for. So you, as a meet referee now, can actually state that I suggest that you do it in this format. So you may want to check the choreography requirement on beam for your gymnast to make sure they all have side choreography, rather than saying they didn't catch it, but that gymnast didn't have side choreography. Or you just make sure the coach knows this is your observation and it's a question that they may want to look and check on. So again, we're trying to have more communication with the coaches in a fairly standardized way. Okay, we've already mentioned that you've got to send a detailed report on the yellow card. Make sure that we understand enough why you gave the yellow card. So we did read a couple of those last year, and we didn't know what made you give the yellow card. There was a comment made about the coach did this or that, but you couldn't tell what this or that was. It was objectionable. So just be sure that you write that in enough detail, or have the judge who issued the yellow card write that in enough detail that we'll be able to understand what it was for and why the yellow card was given. And then after the meet duties, Lois?
As meet referee, you're going to submit the evaluation of all the judges. And most of our meet referees are pretty good about this. When we look at the evaluations at midweek, we're also going to ask some more questions in terms of the meet referee evaluation form for evaluating the meet referees was not clear. So we're going to look at that and see if we can clarify those. So we're going to give the coaches some new questions for evaluating the walking meet referee. And then we're going to add a new question for the meet referees, just like the coaches. The coaches get to ask if this judge should be recommended for regional or national competition later in the season. So we're going to ask for that same input from the meet referees about the judges on their panels.
We have input then into that process as well as the coaches. We think that kind of balances that out a little bit. Meet referees may be asked to meet via Zoom during the season to discuss any issues or errors that need to be addressed. Okay, so what does that mean? It's new this year, so we'll see how it goes. But what they'd like to do is get the meet referees who've been a meet referee in the previous 2 or 3 weeks together to find out if there's something recurring that's going on, so that Lois can send out a clarification or an announcement to be sure and pay attention to this or that. So we will probably do that 2 or 3 or maybe 4 times during the year. So that doesn't mean that every one of you will be in 3 or 4 meetings, Zoom meetings, but if you were a meet rep at a meet in the past, say 3 weeks, then you would probably be invited to attend that and to provide any input, things you might have noticed. Again, we're all trying to help the teams get better and help the judges get better. And here's a bonus question for you, the last one. True or false? The dimensions of the floor exercise area is 40 by 40 feet. And that's false. And if you've ever had to measure a floor at a conference meet or a regional competition or a national competition, it's actually 39.4 and a half, 39.4 and a half. There's a little plus minus wiggle room in there, but it's not 40 by 40, even though we always call it 40 by 40. And I only bring that to your attention because my first time meet repping, we were measuring the floor and it wasn't 40 by 40. And the equipment supplier let us know that, and it confused the coaches as well because they thought it was 40 by 40, but it's actually the wood platform underneath that has to be the 40 by 40. All right, so we're going to be putting additional resources and updates on the NAJ website as they become available, and that's going to primarily be your videos to do the practice judging, additions to the meet referee checklist that didn't make it in, but the coaches would like you to do. Be sure and go to the NAJ website and go to the NCAA section and check those out as they become available. Then toward the end of the season, after the season actually, we'll want to get some of your input on how this went this year. and it's to changes that you would suggest. And so kind of keep notes to yourself of what you think might make this whole thing be better. Remembering that what the coaches asked us to do was to put the meet referee in a position where they could have more influence and be able to communicate more with the coaches.
And I would like to inject in there that we are considering this a pilot year. And so we realize there's going to be some glitches. There may be some glitches in assigning, but we wanted to put this in place and start doing it to the best of our ability this year so that we can continue to make improvements, continue to, make things better for both the judges and the coaches. So be flexible, but also, as Cookie said, feedback is important so that we can move forward next year and do a better job. I also want to mention a thank you to Lois and Cookie. They've worked extremely hard with us over the last year during COVID, and now this year with some of these new ideas that the coaches are bringing to the table. They've been amazing to work with. They've put a ton of time in to helping us come up with these ideas and put them into place. So the coaches organization appreciates their work very much.
Thank you. You guys are a pleasure to work with. That's because we get to work with you and Jess. All right, we will be editing this and putting it up on our Knowledge website and YouTube channel. We'll be adding other resources. We'll be getting to you some instructions on how to download videos if you want to for Google, for the panels to judge. And then at a certain point in time, we'll have new routines up for you to judge with scores and UTL deductions, etc.
And just for your interest's sake, we mentioned at the beginning that there will be a place in JAS just below where it said, did you want to be a meet ref, which will say, I have completed training, meet referee training. So either because you were here tonight, there were 184 people at the maximum time, and or if you know someone that wasn't able to attend and they do it by video, it'll be the honor system to go in and check off that you attended.
Thanks to everyone, and we will see you in the college season, if not before. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Hey.